We've all seen it in the movies, right? A spaceship gets hit, and there's this massive fiery explosion in space, complete with a huge shockwave that just rips other ships to pieces. It's super dramatic, it's loud, and, well, it's almost completely wrong. So let's get into what a nuclear detonation in the final frontier actually looks like.
So let's just ask the question straight up. If you forget everything you've seen in Hollywood, what would you really see and experience if a nuke went off in the dead silence of space? Well, the answer is a whole lot weirder and, honestly, way more terrifying than a simple fireball.
The image that probably just popped into your head is that classic mushroom cloud. You know, that giant, superheated bubble of air rising up, dragging dust and debris with it? We think of this deafening roar and a physical blast wave. But here's the thing. In space, there's no air to heat up, there's no ground to pull debris from, and there's no medium, nothing, to carry a shockwave. So without an atmosphere to push against all of that immense energy, it has nowhere to go but straight out, and that completely changes the whole game. It's not really an explosion in space, it's more like an explosion of space, just filled with invisible, lethal energy. Just look at this breakdown. It's kinda nuts. On Earth, a nuke wastes about half its power just creating a shockwave, literally just pushing air around. Another third becomes heat and light. But in space, the whole equation just flips on its head. The energy doesn't make a blast, the energy is the weapon. So what does that mean in practice? It means that almost 80% of the bomb's power is instantly converted into a flood of X-rays and gamma rays, all of it zipping out at the speed of light. To you, it would just look like a giant, silent camera flash, a brilliant, instantaneous pulse of light, and then that's it. But the invisible damage? Oh, that would have already been done. Okay, so all this invisible energy brings us to the really big question. What would it actually do to any person unlucky enough to be nearby? The answer is pretty grim. Survival here isn't a matter of getting a few meters away. It's a matter of being hundreds of kilometers away.
I mean, the sheer lethality is just hard to wrap your head around. If you're 1 kilometer away, you're just instantly vaporized. Gone. At 10 kilometers, the radiation is so intense it flash boils your bodily fluids, causing, well, explosive disintegration. Even 100 kilometers out, you'd get a fatal dose of radiation that causes total nervous system collapse. There is just no safe zone.
And for anyone on the absolute ragged edge, say 300 kilometers away or more, you're not out of the woods. It just becomes this slower, more agonizing process called acute radiation syndrome. It's this brutal, multi-stage failure of your body's systems, and with high doses, it's almost always fatal. And by the way, that spacesuit offers exactly zero protection against this stuff.
Now, this isn't just theory. It's not science fiction. This actually happened. Back in 1962, the United States ran a high-altitude nuclear test called Starfish Prime. They detonated a 1.4 megaton bomb 400 kilometers up right over the Pacific Ocean. And what happened next? It surprised everybody and showed the world the true, far-reaching power of a nuke in space.
You see, one of the most destructive effects wasn't the radiation itself, but something called an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. When all those gamma rays from the bombs slammed into the upper atmosphere, they basically created this continent-sized electrical surge, a ghost current, powerful enough to just fry electronics on the ground.
And just how far did this EMP travel? 1,450 kilometers. Yeah, that was the distance from the blast all the way to Hawaii. And that pulse knocked out streetlights, it set off burglar alarms, and it wrecked telephone links, all from a single, silent flash hundreds and hundreds of miles away.
But as bad as that was on the ground, the real devastation was happening up in orbit. That single explosion damaged or completely destroyed about a third of all the satellites orbiting the Earth at that time. Think about that. 1/3 of the world's entire orbital infrastructure just wiped out in an instant.
So the legacy of Starfish Prime was just shocking. I mean, besides creating these weird, beautiful, but totally unnatural auroras across the Pacific, it proved a single nuke could fry electronics from 1,000 kilometers away. It destroyed satellites, and maybe most disturbingly, it showed that these weapons could poison the very space around our planet for years to come.
So, yeah, that was 1962, a time when satellites were still kind of a novelty. What about today? Now that our entire civilization basically runs on them. Well, now the long-term effects of a space nuke are exponentially more dangerous.
See, the Starfish Prime test pumped a ton of high-energy electrons into the Earth's magnetosphere. It created a man-made radiation belt that just hung around for over 5 years. Any satellite that passed through that belt got its electronics fried. A modern detonation could create a permanent no-go zone in orbit, making huge critical altitudes totally unusable.
And what's even worse is the debris. If a blast shatters even a few satellites, those fragments become thousands of tiny, high-velocity bullets. They hit other satellites, creating more fragments, which then hit even more satellites. It's a chain reaction. It's called Kessler syndrome, and it could wrap the Earth in a shell of lethal debris, effectively cutting us off from space for generations.
And look, this isn't some abstract threat. Just think about your day, the GPS that got you somewhere, that online bank transaction you made, the weather report you checked, even the internet you're using to watch this right now. All of it, every last bit, depends on this incredibly fragile infrastructure up in orbit that is completely vulnerable.
So, when you put all of this together, you start to realize something pretty profound. A nuclear weapon in space isn't really about blowing one thing up. It's a strategic weapon of area denial. It's designed to blind and cripple an entire nation without ever touching the ground.
This really gets to the heart of it. The true horror of a nuke in space isn't that bright flash of light. It's the silent, invisible poison it leaves behind, a contamination that could cripple our modern world and slam the door to the final frontier shut for good.
And that leaves us with a pretty chilling thought to end on. We have spent decades building our entire global society on this delicate foundation of satellites, just a few hundred kilometers up. Starfish Prime showed us just how easily all of that can be torn down. So the question we really have to ask ourselves is, how fragile is that foundation really?